You ever been ambushed by your past? And what I mean is, like, you thought that you had things sorted, you thought that you had things figured out, you were no longer traumatized, emotional, and then on a random Monday afternoon, in the most random of circumstances, something happens and it just triggers something deep within you. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. That happened to me recently. I recently went back to counseling, some stuff happened, it bubbled up, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that was still there. And I got ambushed by something that happened 15 years ago, and it popped up on a random Monday in my life. And if I'm honest, I don't like going back to that space. I don't like going back to that place, that time. Not only do I not like going back there, I don't like talking about it, I don't like thinking about it. But what's so interesting, when you get into the New Testament, most of it was written by a man named Paul, who used to be known as a man named Saul, who has a crazy past. When you get to Acts chapter 13, it's this kind of delineating line in the New Testament that after Acts 13, this man who was named Saul, who becomes Paul, the only time he is referenced again as Saul, associated with his past self, his old self, his kind of bad history with the church. The only time that happens after Acts 13 is when Paul talks about his past. In fact, he opens a lot of his letters in the New Testament by calling himself chief of sinners. He says, I'm the worst of the worst. I'm the most deserving of the cross. And so what's really interesting is you spend enough time around people, you start to understand that everybody's got stuff in their lives. Everybody's got junk. It's either in your past, it's in your present, and if it's not in your past or your present, then it's in your future, right? Everybody's got stuff. And nobody likes to talk about it. But with Paul, he's always, all throughout the New Testament, very open about where he's come from, very open about who he used to be. And he's not afraid to tell his story. And with Paul, you see this courage, that I'm not ashamed of where I've been because it's not who I am. In fact, it says this in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. It's like Paul understood that once he said yes to the love and grace and mercy of Jesus, he was no longer the same person. He didn't have to be ashamed of who he was because it's no longer who he was. He was crucified with Christ. The old is gone and the new has come. And so all of that to say, when you look at the story of Paul, when you look at the life of Paul, and he's so open and honest about where he's been, it's because he understood that he was talking to people who for their entire lives have been told, you're not good enough for God, your life is too messed up, you've done too many things, this time you've taken it too far. And so Paul gets very honest about his past, very honest about who he used to be, understanding that that's not who he is anymore, hoping that people would see the transformation in his life and believe they could have that same transformation in there. So what do we learn from Paul is don't be ashamed of your story, because that's where God showed up in your life, and your past might be somebody's present. What you went through might be what somebody is currently going through, and they may need you to open up and to be vulnerable and go, man, I have been there. I've suffered through that. I've struggled through that. And God met me there. That's where God met me in my story. And if he met me in my story, maybe he can meet you in yours. We should all be like Paul. So don't throw away the power of your past, because your past might be somebody's present.